So today we are going to be unlearning. So those of you who like learning can leave because we're not going to be learning anymore. We're going to be talking about the challenge of change, and I would like to break your brains this morning. So let's do this. If you would, look at this, all right? And in the top left corner, look at that directional word and tell me what it should say. Up, correct. Everybody, what should it say? Up, yeah. All right, so we are going to, all as a wonderful big Ruby Hash Rocket ACR family, we're going to do it together and say the correct directional words going across, all right? Here we go. 1, 2, 3.
Up, down, up, left, right, up, down, down, up, down, up, left, right, up.
Woo! Nice. Give yourselves a high five for all the mistakes and all the glory. Yes. All right. Our environment in which we live and work demands us to unlearn so that we can shift and make room for something new. So I'm Jessie Shternshus. I'm the owner of the Improv Effect. Like Marion said, I started working probably 11 years ago, so over a decade ago, and one of my very first clients in technology was Hash Rocket. So I started with them when they were first starting as well. I work with companies big and small worldwide, helping them with communication, collaboration, and creative problem solving all over. And my unlearning journey has been very long. It's continuing to this day. Before I started my company, I was a teacher. I worked in the school system here in Duval County. And then before that, I worked in television for Sesame Street. I worked at Sesame Street before that. So I've done a lot of different things. And when I decided to start my company, I wanted to kind of put everything I love together and help people learn the skills that I knew and help them be better communicators, better leaders, and whatnot. So last year, I got to speak in Australia at Agile Australia, and they had a lot of these signs. You might see those in the UK as well. So they drive on the opposite side of the street and talk about unlearning. So I was trying not to get run over. And a couple of my friends and I were some of the speakers from the States. And so we called an Uber, and we thought it was going okay. We got the Uber, it came. So we were like, okay, mission accomplished. And there were 4 of us. And all of a sudden, my friend Sarah, she's like, okay, I'll sit shotgun, I'll sit up front. And she goes to open the door, and she's like, ah! And the driver's like, ah! And I think he thought he was going to be mugged because she was going to sit on his lap, and he was not in the correct seat in her mind, and he didn't know why she was about to sit down. And so she slams the door back on him, and he's like, oh my God, what's going on? And so clearly we didn't unlearn fast enough, right? So she went around and sat in the right seat, and we're laughing hysterically because it was hilarious. And also, we were stupid Americans. So clearly, unlearning is all around us. It's hard, but it is a way of life, right? Shifting is a way of life. So what is unlearning? Well, when we learn, we add new skills or knowledge to what we already know. And when we unlearn, we step outside of our mental model in order to choose a different one. So we'll discard something learned that's false or outdated information from our memory. So it looks something like this, oh, it used to work, but not anymore, right? And there's 3 levels of unlearning that happen in organizations. All right, it happens on the individual, team, and organizational level. And then there are 2 types of unlearning. There are one where no habits are formed, and there's another where habits are formed. So for instance, if you were to give me a book about rocket science, I might learn something, but I personally would have no problem forgetting it. If you were to tell me to buckle my seatbelt, my parents were pretty good at that, even though I grew up in the 80s. They did have me buckle my seatbelt, so I do it without even thinking. And so this would be something harder to unlearn, right? I just do it naturally. In fact, a few years ago, we had a hurricane here in Jacksonville. We lost our power for Hurricane Matthew, and the power was out. And so consciously, I knew we had lost our power, but every time I went into the room, I would constantly flip the light switch because it's just something habit, it's habitual. So I'd go in the room, flip the light switch, but I knew we didn't have power. And by the time I finally was like, oh, don't turn the light switch, we don't have power, we already had our power back. So yay, again, not doing a very good job on learning, but I was trying. So how many of you have heard this quote? It's just like riding a bike. You heard that before? All right, so there's this awesome video. I want to show you a little bit about reverse engineering a bike.
Welcome back to Smarter Every Day. You've heard people say it's just like riding a bike, meaning it's really easy and you can't forget how to do it, right? But I did something that damaged my mind. It happened on the streets of Amsterdam, and I got really scared, honestly. I can't ride a bike like you can anymore. Before I show you the video of what happened, I need to tell you the backstory. Like many 6-year-olds with a MacGyver mullet, I learned how to ride a bike when I was really young. I had learned a life skill and I was really proud of it. Everything changed though when my friend Barney called me 25 years later. Where I work, the welders are geniuses and they like to play jokes on the engineers. He had a challenge for me. He had built a special bicycle and he wanted me to try to ride it. He had only changed one thing. When you turn the handlebar to the left, the wheel goes to the right. When you turn it to the right, the wheel goes to the left. I thought this would be easy, so I hopped on the bike ready to demonstrate how quickly I could conquer this.
And here he is, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Destin Sandlin. First attempt riding the bicycle.
All right. So the faster I go, the better. Yeah.
I couldn't do it. You can see that I'm laughing, but I'm actually really frustrated. In this moment, I had a really deep revelation. My thinking was in a rut. This bike revealed a very deep truth to me. I had the knowledge of how to operate the bike, but I did not have the understanding. Therefore, knowledge is not understanding. Look, I know what you're probably thinking. Destin's probably just an uncoordinated engineer and can't do it. But that's not the case at all. The algorithm that's associated with riding a bike in your brain is just that complicated. Think about it. Downwards force on the pedals, leaning your whole body, pulling and pushing the handlebars, gyroscopic precession in the wheels, every single force is part of this algorithm. And if you change any one part, it affects the entire control system. I do not make definitive statements that often, but I'm telling you right now, you cannot ride this bicycle. You might think you can, but you can't. I know this because I'm often asked to speak at universities and conferences and I take the bike with me. It's always the same. People think they're going to try some trick or they're just going to power through it. It doesn't work. Your brain cannot handle this. For instance, this guy, I offered him $200 just to ride this bike 10 feet across the stage. Everybody thought he could do it.
No, you didn't understand. You didn't understand. So, this way. Okay. All right, just a second. All right, so, whenever you're ready. Yeah. Wait. No, you have to keep your feet on. Dude, all right, give it a go. Wait. Like, you gotta start rolling at least. And go. Oh, go! All right, back up. Okay, wait. Keep your feet on the pedal. Go. Go right on. Just keep your feet on the pedals. Hands on. Yeah, come on. All right, one more time. Okay.
Once you have a rigid way of thinking in your head, sometimes you cannot change that, even if you want to. So here's what I did. It was a personal challenge. I stayed out here in this driveway and I practiced about 5 minutes every day. My neighbors made fun of me. I had many wrecks, but after 8 months, this happened. One day I couldn't ride the bike and the next day I could. It It was like I could feel some kind of pathway in my brain that was now unlocked. It was really weird though. It's like there's this trail in my brain, but if I wasn't paying close enough attention to it, my brain would easily lose that neural path and jump back onto the old road it was more familiar with. Any small distractions at all, like a cell phone ringing in my pocket, would instantly throw my brain back to the old control algorithm and I would wreck. But at least I could ride it. My son is the closest person to me genetically, and he's been riding a normal bike for 3 years. That's over half his life. I wanted to know how long it would take him to learn how to ride a backwards bike, so I told him if he learned how to ride a backwards bike, he could go with me to Australia and meet a real astronaut. Are you gonna give up?
No.
Go ahead. This is how it starts. Look at this. This is such a big deal. Get up, you got it. Did you see his brain get it? So in how many weeks have we been doing this? 2 weeks? In 2 weeks, he did something that took me 8 months to do, which demonstrates that a child has more neuroplasticity, am I even saying that right, than an adult.
So other than being a great dad, what did you, I'm just kidding. So how was it that the child learned faster than the adult? Why do you think that was?
They didn't have to unlearn.
Exactly. So he'd been doing it not as long, right? So it took him only 2 weeks to do the reverse engineered bicycle. So what can we learn from that? Well, first of all, there was less to unlearn, and also children approach things in a different way, right? They approach it with curiosity. They ask why, right? And so they have a different way of wanting to learn as well, and a lot less to let go. While I was researching for this talk, I was learning about Einstein, and what I thought was really interesting is that some of the things that were most profound that he learned were in the beginning of his career. So even though he was gaining more and more knowledge, the things that he's most well known for actually happened in the first few years of his career. I thought that was really, really quite interesting. I think this kind of relates to work. So when you think about the newbies, the new people that are onboarded onto your team, a lot of times we disregard what they have to say, when in reality we should really be listening to their perspective, because they actually bring a lot of interesting ideas, innovative ideas, because they're new, because they're not necessarily the expert. And so we should be giving them a seat at the table and a voice at the table as well. When I would teach improv classes here in Jacksonville, what was interesting is I would have a group of students typically that were new to improv, and then I would have a group of students that had done improv before. And at first, the ones who had done improv before knew everything, and they would seem to be going faster. But in improv, just like when you're forming a new team in technology or in anything, you really want to create a culture for that team from scratch if you can. And so what would happen is the newer people that had never done improv before would rocket past the other people. At some point, the ones who had come in who had done improv before would kind of plateau, and the other ones would just rocket way past them. And so this is the same kind of thing you'll see on teams a lot of times, because they're not having to shed the old way of doing things from other companies, other programming languages, things like that. So kind of interesting to think about. I like this quote: "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few." So if you will, if you're sitting next to somebody, I want to do a little exercise. So you have to be sitting face to face, and we're going to do an exercise called space numbers, okay? So Andrew, will you come here for a second? I'll show you what we're going to do. So watch me and Andrew for a second, all right? It's nothing too awkward, I promise, all right? So this is what's going to happen. Person number 1 is going to be drawing numbers in space from 1 to 10, okay? The other person, I feel like I'm getting feedback. The other person is going to be mirroring them. So Andrew, if you'll come. All right, so if I do 1, you're just going to mirror my 1 in space, right? And then I'm going to do 2. And he's going to try to mirror me the best he can. And if we mess up, we'll just high five and we'll move on. It's just a game. It doesn't matter, okay? And then we'll switch. By the time we get to 10, then Andrew will do a 1, and I'll mirror him. And then... okay, so, and we'll go all the way to 10. Anytime we mess up, we'll high five. So you'll both get a chance to torture each other, okay? So everybody have a partner. If you don't, Andrew will be your friend, okay? Or if you don't. Okay, All right, so everybody give it a shot. 1 through 10, and then switch. Who needs a partner?
Get your choice.
Remember to high five if you mess up. It's okay.
It was a 4 like that.
You gotta mirror them. High five if you mess up. It's okay. And then continue. Go all the way to 10. 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 Try to go all the way to 10. Your brain's messed up now.
My brain's messed up.
You're welcome.
Well, I'm a doll.
All right. So, how many of you did perfect? How many of you messed up? Woohoo! High five to you all. All right. So, what was hard about it? What was hard? Different handwriting. Yeah. So, how many of you messed up at 2? How many of you messed up by 4? Yeah. What happened at 4? Yeah. Yep. Closed versus open. What about you got past 4, but 7 just killed you? Yeah. Fancy 7 people. You're like, oh, you're so fancy. Why do you have to be so fancy on me? So how could you set your partner up for success? How could you make them successful if I was to have you do it again?
Tell them ahead of time what you're going to do.
Tell them ahead of time what you're going to do.
Move slow.
Move slowly. Yeah. Did anybody have a partner that was like, no? No? What if they had done it on the trampoline? See, it could have been worse. So you want to slow down. You don't want to show off that you're so great at space numbers, right, for your partner. Like, that's not a thing. So it wasn't about being fancy. So think about it, right? If it's hard to unlearn how to do one number, like a 2 or a 4 or a 7 backwards, it's really hard to do a digital transformation, right? It's really hard to do an organizational transformation and unlearn what people have been doing, right, all along, right? So if it's that hard to do a 4 backwards, have some empathy for what it's like to unlearn a whole new language, right? A whole transformation. And keep that in mind, all right? So what's happening in the brain when you're unlearning? All right, so when we learn, we form these deep neural pathways in our brain, in a part of the brain called the basal ganglia. And I like to think of it, because I like to have visuals, as a big green grassy field. Okay, so if this was a big green grassy field and I was learning something, and every day I did something habitually, like put on my seatbelt, okay, and I go from point A to point B. So I would walk across the grassy field, A to B, and back to A, and back to B, right? So I keep doing that thing over and over again, doing my seatbelt in my brain. So what's happening to the grass in the field? It's going down, right? Packing down or killing it, right? If some awful weed fertilizer. Okay, right, or I'm killing it. Okay, so one day I'm like, I don't really need a seatbelt. I want to do something different with my life. I don't know why, but that was a terrible example to start with. But maybe I'm becoming a rebel later in life. And so I'm like, to hell with seatbelts. I'm going to be free. And so I'm going to go from A to C, okay? So I'm walking from A to C. Okay, I start a new habit of being a rebel, A to C. Okay, boo-da-doo-da-doo-da-doo. That's my rebel singing song. And so from A to B, did the grass grow back overnight? No way, it did not. So again, we don't like unlearn overnight, right? It's still, if we use the weed whacker, it's dead, right? So it's definitely not gonna grow back overnight depending on what I use to kill it. But eventually it will grow back, yeah? So we, again, in our brains, we have neuroplasticity, but it's not gonna happen right away. So again, think about what's happening in our brains when we're unlearning and give ourselves some credit. Unlearning is hard and long, but it's necessary because what got you here won't get you there. We don't wanna end up like these poor fellas. That's sad, right? Because sometimes when you look up and you're the turtle in the hare, they might have built a street with the moving truck, right? Let's not be them. So.
Question? Mary?
Sorry.
Yes? Oh, okay. Just kidding. I want to tell you a story about when I was working for the Florida School for the Deaf and Blind. So there's a school here in St. Augustine. They had reached out to my company, the Improv Effect, and they had asked if we would work with their students that were in high school. They have a job readiness program. And they wanted to know if we could teach them some skills using applied improvisation to get them better at communicating, to get them ready to do interviewing skills and things like that. So my first thought was, no. I was like, this isn't gonna work. I thought, everything that we do relies on eye contact, and the students that they wanted us to work with were visually impaired. And what was really going on in my mind, to be truthful, is that I was so nervous. Like, I was like, I've never worked with an entire population of visually impaired students, and I didn't know how to do it. And so I made this excuse in my mind that, like, it wouldn't work, and so I was, like, scared to take the job. And so I thought, no, there's no way. Assumptions, you can't do this, no. And they said, well, we really need the help, blah, blah, blah. And so luckily, I was like, okay, this should be exactly what I should do. Like, I need to take this risk and figure it out. So luckily, eventually I said yes, because I think I was nervous that I would say or do something wrong because I hadn't worked with this population before. Luckily, I did say yes, and turned out to be one of the best jobs I've ever had in my life. They ended up teaching me a ton, and they were incredible. So what I ended up doing is rethinking about the curriculum in a way that didn't have to use sight. And so we got them prepared for their jobs, and they were amazing. I mean, absolutely over the top, incredible. And we ended up working with them over 5 different summers. So remember that a lot of times you can make those assumptions in your mind that something's not going to work when really it could be wrong, and that's something you need to unlearn. So let's take a self-awareness selfie and examine our beliefs. So do I need to think, behave, or do something in a new way? Is there previous learning that's preventing me from thinking, behaving, or doing things in a new way? So for instance, like the story I just told you, where I got blocked and said, oh no, I can't do it that way. It's impossible to do what I do without sight. And I was wrong. Is what I'm trying to learn a threat or challenge to my identity, to how I see myself or how I see the world? Would trying harder give me the results that I'm looking for, or might it create more entrenchment? There is no mind harder to change than the one that's been hugely rewarded for not changing. Let me say that one more time. There is no mind harder to change than one that's been hugely rewarded for not changing. So think about yourself or other people in your organizations, people that you know. When you've been rewarded for doing something a different way, that's even harder to let go or to unlearn. What's in it for them? Why would they want to if all along they've been rewarded for doing it a different way? Unlearning is all around us, right? It's when we go somewhere else. It's a new programming language. It's a new design. It's when we get new furniture, a new computer. I mean, literally, it's new banking systems. It's new, the way we exercise. We're constantly having to unlearn. How many of you are familiar with this sign? Yes? So how do we know what gender that sign is supposed to be? By what? The dress, right? Yeah. So, have you seen this? Yeah. All right. So, my friend, Tanya Katan, was asked to do a marketing campaign for her company called Axosoft. And she was given the assignment to go out into the world and find something that all of us know and see and recognize and make us see it differently, make us shift our way of thinking. So she picked the bathroom sign. And she thought, what if it were never a dress? What if it were a cape, right? And this became a really popular movement, right? And if you go on itwasneveradress.com, you can see all these different people wearing capes and like different things they've done by the signs. And it's really actually an amazing movement that she's started. And so again, it's like we take these things for granted. We don't necessarily question them, but what if we did? What if we stepped back and said, well, what if it was something different, right? And that's what she was able to do. So I thought we could do some of our own. So is this a man throwing something in the trash? Or is it a juggler giving up on his lifelong dreams? So what do you think this is? What could this be? What do you? IKEA attacks a man. Yes. What else could it be?
A guy about to ship himself somewhere.
A guy about to ship himself somewhere. Yes. That's whiplash. There it is, right there for you. What else?
Magic trick.
A magic trick. What?
He's putting a box on a dolly.
He's putting a box on a dolly. Yep. What else? They're dancing. What? Who's they? What's he dancing with? He's dancing with a refrigerator. You know, the refrigerator needs to dance too, people. What else? What else? What? He's walking up the attic stairs. Yeah, he's like, here I go. Yep, nice. It's the biggest rack of ribs ever. Yeah. Yes, it's not a person. It's a teapot, people. It's a teapot climbing up the attic stairs.
Sign said pull.
The sign said pull. Yep. All right, here, let's do another one. What's this?
Bacon.
Drop the mic, we're done. All right, cool. Moving on. All right. So, yeah, I don't think we need it anymore after that. It's just bacon. Okay, cool. So, how do we become unlearning organizations? All right. So, an organization that cannot unlearn will never become a learning organization. And transformation is not a transactional activity. It's ongoing and it changes over time. Dan North. All right. So, meaning when I get a call and somebody's like, hey, we're having all these challenges in our organization. Nobody gets along. Our projects are never getting done. We can't deliver for our clients. And can you come next week, Wednesday morning, and be done by lunch to fix it all? I'm like, what are you talking about? No, So again, it's not a transactional activity. You can't fix things just with one swipe, in one afternoon. These things take small steps and they happen over time. They're not going to miraculously happen when you wake up one morning. And part of this is mental models eventually become company values, right? So when you start a company, especially if you've been a startup, right, or you started a company of your own, your mental models become those values, those core values. And then sometimes you need to look at them and say, do these values match who we are right now? Do they still make sense? What got you here maybe won't get you there, right? So do these things still make sense for our company core values, or do we need to unlearn them and figure out something new? And then change. It's hard to make because people are constantly playing this tug of war. You've got this one side, this is how we do it, and this other side, oh, I'm trying something new. And it's constantly like people are in battle with each other and sometimes with themselves too. They know what's right, but they're still having a battle. And then think about these companies that refuse to adapt. They were great in their time, but some of them are trying to come back, I hear, Toys R Us. There's, I think, one Blockbuster left in the world. But these were companies that were great in their heyday, and they refused to adapt and unlearn, and their mental models and company values kind of led them to the trash bin. So what are some examples of unlearning at work? Can you think of some of those things so that you're not this guy? When I was your age, things were exactly the way they are now, son. Let's not be him. How can we make shift happen? So here's a little acronym I made up. All right. First, we want to S, surface the resistance. And then H, hear what they have to say. And then I, identify the value for them to change. F, find ways to break down barriers. And T, train them with experiential methods day by day. So how can we surface the resistance between have to versus wanna? Meaning, if you're coming in and you're working with a client or you're working with your team, how can you make sure you're not saying, this is how we're gonna do it, so do it or else, right? Find out what's in it for them so that they want to make the change versus you're just telling them. Be transparent about what's happening so they can understand and feel like they have ownership in that transformation. Remember that unlearning is hard and empathy is required, and what it was like when you were just beginning. What was it like when you were being onboarded and things just started and everything was a bunch of acronyms? Like you weren't sure what TDD and KPI were, and maybe they meant something else at a previous job, and you're like, I have no idea, these people are speaking a foreign language, and you're just like, yeah, and then you're kind of like Googling it later, and you're like, what on earth is a KPI? I remember being at like my first Ruby conference, and I was like hearing JSON, and I was just hearing all these things, and I was like kind of laughing. I was like, what's a cucumber? Like I had no idea what was going on. I was like trying to play it cool, but I was not, I'm still not cool, but I was like trying to pretend I knew what was going on. I had no clue what anybody was talking about. I remember when I first heard about Agile at HashRock, and I was like, that seems cool, but I was like totally trying to fake it till I make it and figuring out what all this stuff was in the beginning. So remember what that's like for the newbies, and try to sit in the pocket of being new, being a beginner, so that you have empathy for that as well. So do you guys all have a piece of paper or some paper nearby? All right. If you will, grab a piece of paper, and I would like you to write down something on that piece of paper that you have to unlearn that is maybe hard, whether it's personal or at work, that's hard. And we're going to make paper airplanes, and we're going to throw them at each other. So so I want you to write down something. What's something that you have to unlearn that's currently maybe hard, you're stuck at, or you're working on, that you have to unlearn, shift, let go of? Write that thing down, and then you're going to make a paper airplane. Do not throw it till I say go, all right, even though you're super excited. I know you are, I can tell. All right, so write down what's something, and try to write legibly, blah, 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 Shternshus, the best that you can, all right? What's something that you have to unlearn? It could be personal, it could be at work. Something you have to unlearn.
I made a paper airplane a long time. Yeah, it's a toy. Oh.
Yep, there it is.
Alright, so we can make this that airplane.
You can make this airplane. You can make, if you have a better model, like you made one this morning.
Unlearn it.
Yeah, unlearn it and do this one. Just kidding. All right. And then in a second, we'll get up and we'll throw them at each other. But don't do it prematurely.
I only watch airplanes in anger.
Yeah. Uh-oh.
It's always at the end there when they do, like, what does that actually mean?
I have no
Middle
idea.
one? What does it mean?
Mine always hits my feet, if that makes anybody feel any better.
Outwards, like, it's terrible.
I don't know. I can't. I'm really bad at making paper airplanes.
Well, the instructions are clear. The instructions are
I can't make them, even with the instruction. I'm like,
Going back to middle school.
yeah, mine is like, yours is good. Mine's, yeah. Notice I'm not even attempting. All right, maybe like 5 more seconds. No pressure. All the perfectionists are coming out. All right. No worries if they hit the ground. Just try not to poke people's eyes out because of insurance purposes. So what we're going to do is we're going to have like this side of the room face that side of the room, that side of the room face this side of the room, and then you're going to try to like grab one before it hits you in the face, and then we'll have people read ones that landed on them. Okay? It's what we're going to try for. We can see what happens. Okay? So if you will, like stand up. Don't throw anything. I'll count to 3. So okay. So look at your enemy from across the way. Okay? All right. Lock eyes on your favorite friend or enemy. Okay? So everybody stand up. Everybody stand up. All right? All right, get ready because you're going to get some planes launched at you. If you got here late, just duck and cover. Okay, here we go. Ready? 1, 2. Oh, we have snowballs coming too. 1, 2, 3. Woo! All right, now pick up some. Look around. There's some all over the place. Some people hit themselves. If you see extra ones, give them to somebody. Somebody got a missile? Yes. Somebody got a snowball, but that was the latecomers. Right. Yeah. Oh, thank you. All right. So if somebody would like to read.
Raise your hand.
Yes.
I will read.
Diana's got one. And we got missile reader over there.
Okay, somebody wants to unlearn that everything isn't as bad as it looks.
Oh, nice. That's good. Yes. Yeah. It's terrible. Yeah. All right, the missile. What did the missile say?
Somebody has to unlearn hating JavaScript.
All right. All right. Well, there you go. That's good.
Anyone over here?
Anybody else have one?
So I learn how to stop worrying about the future.
Oh, unlearn to stop worrying about the future. Nice. Yep.
Well, it's in the back.
Other people can do the operational stuff too.
Oh, that's good. I gotta unlearn
Any
that
other
too.
contestants over here?
Any other people?
Someone wants to unlearn time management.
Oh, just like free for all. Cool. I like that. I think there was some over there too. You know.
Someone wants to unlearn shyness and self-doubt.
Say it's shyness and self-doubt. Nice. Nice.
Anyone else?
Nice.
So I don't know, either unlearn forcing your kids to get straight A's or unlearn getting your kids to get straight A's.
Okay, so yeah, so maybe like thinking about having your kids get straight A's, maybe unlearn that. That's good too.
Some people need to unlearn how to be late.
Ooh! Ooh!
Not cool.
Way to make the crowd angry, you know. Thanks. Thanks, aggressive. Hashtag aggressive.
Some people want to unlearn their current Git workflow to conform to their new project.
Oh, nice.
Get blame. Pointing away from face.
How I cross-country ski.
Oh,
Any takers back here?
all right. Nice. Excellent job, everybody. And great planes. Nobody got injured. I'd call that perfect. So what are some rules for getting ahead? We need to change habits, change mindsets, and bring an outsider's perspective. So I've been working for a large food company up in Chicago, and we were working on a problem around food waste. How do we think about not wasting food? And I was working with their innovation lab. And one day I was walking back to the hotel, and I called my daughter, and she was asking me, "So, Mommy, what were you working on?" And so I said, "Well, we were talking about the problem of food waste. Do you know what that is?" And she's like, "I don't know what that means." So I said, "Well, a lot of times when we eat, we throw away a lot of our food. So think about like Thanksgiving, and all this food gets wasted, it gets thrown out, and we make this huge meal, but then a lot of it doesn't get eaten." And so we spent this whole week thinking about the journey from farm to consumer and how we would make people not throw away a lot of food. And she's like, "You spent the whole week doing that, Mom? Why?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" She's like, "Just make it taste like chocolate. I don't really understand why you have to be there all week. Come home." And I was like, "Oh." And so she thinks I'm an idiot, for one. She's not sure why people pay me to do anything. But I came back the next day, and I told them the story. And I was like, "So my daughter Maya thinks that we should just make everything taste like chocolate, and nobody would waste as much food." And so they were like, "That's actually pretty interesting and funny." But what they ended up doing is they started a program at the Innovation Lab there for kids in junior high to come in the summer and participate in the Innovation Lab. And so when they brainstorm and do ideations, they bring the kids in and they start using the kids and their ideas because they have that childlike perspective and less of a filter than adults, and it's like they don't have their blinders on, and so they're thinking in a way that's actually like a newbie. And so that kind of came out of that conversation, which is pretty interesting and pretty cool.
What food company was that?
That was, I can actually say it now because their thing came out. That was Tyson Foods. Yeah. Curiosity, experimentation, and play. So there's an exercise called escape thinking that's really helpful for unlearning. And how you do it, if you wanted to try to do this with your teams, it's pretty simple. What you would do, I like to start with the exercise of taking the attributes of something and just limiting one thing to help people think about how they could unlearn, but not in a massive way that's paralyzing. So what I'll do is I'll start by saying, put all the attributes down of a restaurant. So I'll have everybody like write down on a sheet of paper, what are all the attributes of a restaurant? So like a restaurant has tables, chairs, menus, servers, food, and they'll just write down all those things on a piece of paper. And then I'll have the group take away one attribute of that restaurant. So what if a restaurant did not have tables? And then they start to explore what the world would be like, what that restaurant would be like if it didn't have tables, and start to think about that restaurant. And that's called escape thinking. Then you can do that same exact thing with your team. So if we had stand-ups, let's say, put all the attributes of a stand-up. What would it be like if we no longer had Slack, but we're a remote team? How would we do it without Slack? You still have all the exact same attributes except for Slack. Now what does the world look like? So what this does is it helps them start to unlearn or question something that maybe could make it better, or start to think about something in a different way and make it innovative. But it's not like we're getting rid of every single thing. We're just getting rid of one thing that could make a huge change and make it for the better. You can also conduct unlearning reviews. So when you're meeting with people and you're saying, what is your KPI, or what are the things you want to learn in the next 90 days? What are the things you want to unlearn in the next 90 days? What are some things you want to let go of to make room for something new? So make that a part of the question too. What are some things that you no longer need, right? Make that a question as well. You can use improv, right? Like those games that we did today. So you could do like space numbers to show that there's empathy. It's super simple, but there's so much learning that can happen from experiential exercises. And do it daily, right? It's not something that's transactional. It's something that you need to do every single day and practice, right? So unlearning organizations, they seek different perspectives. They disrupt routines. They start with why. You're actively listening, breaking the rules, curiously exploring, and they integrate change on each level of the business. If you like those exercises, I've written a book called Control Shift. It's got 50 games for 50 blanking days like today. So every single page in there has a different exercise that you could do. There it is. All right. Tons of different things you can do with your team, as individuals, and as an organization. So what are you going to unlearn first? Remember, it's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent. It's the one that is the most adaptable to change. So, DFTU. Don't forget to unlearn. Thank you very much. Good job, everybody. Yay! Thanks, guys.